Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Better You podcast. I'm joined by Allie Bailey and Dr. Tracy Tilton. And today we're talking about psychopathy, or I guess being a psychopath, which I think is something that probably gets used in the wrong way all the time. But I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Tilton to kind of explain a little bit more about psychopathy.
Okay. So a psychopath is a person who exhibits traits of, it's a personality construct that's characterized by deceitfulness, manipulation, lack of empathy, lack of remorse, and violating social norms. It's not in the DSM, and I'll get into why that is a little bit later. But it's a spectrum disorder, just meaning that there's a huge range of traits that people can experience at different severity levels, different functional levels, things of that nature. It is often associated with antisocial personality disorder, but it's distinct from that. And everyone who, a lot of people who have psychopathy, most of them have antisocial personality disorder, but only 1/3 of antisocial people have psychopathy. So, and the way you diagnose it is the gold standard of diagnosis is using the PCLR by Dr. Hare, and it assesses psychopathy, and you use an interview with the person and hopefully a ton of records, and then any corroborating, if you can talk to family members, other people who know him or her, because they can be both men and women can get it, though it's more diagnosed in men. So I'm going to read the symptoms of it, and a score of 30 or higher is generally used to mean you're a psychopath.
So
Go ahead.
I did want to interrupt, and I know, Ali, you had a question here, but ahead of time, like most, I have a question too, and it's not a good one, but I still want to ask it. Uh, Most of my experience with psychopathy is like a couple articles I've read here and there, and then like people talking about the dark triad, but really most of it for me is comic books. Um, how how accurate are like, you know, essentially comic book supervillains in terms of being psychopaths?
Well, that's kind of hard to determine just because, I mean, you can see probably like let's see, like maybe their behavioral problems that maybe made them become like, if it's a negative superpower, like had behavioral problems when they were little, maybe that morphed into like why they're so evil now or something along those lines. But that's a good question. That's a really good question. So,
No, Ali had a question too.
oh
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Oh, just so no problem. So a question I have, and I believe you mentioned an assessment. So I'm a little unfamiliar with that assessment tool, but I know specifically with like personality disorders and things, like are there, I guess, other personality disorders that can be, I guess, used to be assessed or diagnosed with that one tool you mentioned of the O'Hare, you said? Or
No, yeah, Dr. Hare's is called the PCLR, the psychopathy checklist, and that's like the
okay.
revised edition. It is for people either antisocial personality disorder or suspected psychopaths. Those are really the only two personality disorders that you would use it for.
Thank you.
And we were told, like when I worked in corrections, to use it very sparingly because it has such a stigma and it's such a label that like you don't want to just throw it out there and say someone's a psychopath, especially in a correctional setting. It can change their treatment options. It can mean that they end up getting incarcerated longer because of behavioral problems within the institution. There's no cure for it. You can sometimes manage it, but I'll talk about that. So we are told, you can't just do a PCLR on everyone that's, like a major behavior problem beyond being in prison. So they're obviously a behavioral problem to begin with somewhere, sometime. But then, once they get into the institution, it's not like you would have like a group therapy with all the psychopaths or anything like that. So you score it by definitely present, possibly present, or definitely absent. So it's 0, 1, 2. And there's 20 traits, like glibness, superficial charm, egocentricity, grandiose sense of self-worth, proneness to boredom, low frustration tolerance, pathological lying, conning, lack of remorse or guilt, lack of affect, callous, parasitic lifestyle, promiscuous sexual relationships, early behavior problems, lack of realistic long-term plans, frequent marital relationships, juvenile delinquency, if I can talk, and failure to accept responsibilities for one's own actions. So there's a lot of traits. And if you get 30 or above, you're a psychopath, most likely. I've used it for people in corrections, and some people have gotten 40, which is the high score. And, and those people, one thing is they're glib or charming, and those people, many of them definitely were. You talk to them and they're engaging, and you find yourself being engaging back, and you're talking to them, and then you walk away and like the hair in the back of your neck stands up because you're just like, oh my God, who was that person? And like, why are they making me feel like this? So it is, there's two factors with that. And the main one is interpersonal affective factors. And the second one is lifestyle antisocial factors. So more behavioral. And the first one's like more emotional, like emotional deficits, stuff like that. It's estimated that each year psychopathy costs more than $460 billion in the criminal justice system.
What?
Oh, is that insane? Like they're,
That's so much.
I
I
know.
was thinking like, oh, maybe a few billion, and then I was like, no, there was 100 before she said billion. That
Yeah,
is so much money.
I know.
Wow.
I
Okay.
know.
Wow.
Yeah. And they, psychopaths compared to people with like antisocial personality disorder have a tendency to cause a lot of problems in institutions, a lot of problems. And they just, because of the way they can charm people and get them kind of under their spell, for lack of a better word, and then they can start, manipulating and everything else that they do, conning, lying, and all that stuff. Several women at correctional facilities I worked at were caught having relationships with two people who are psychopaths and inappropriate relationships, and were, walked off the complex and investigated and lost their jobs. And it happens quite frequently with people with that disorder because they can charm you. Even if you think like, oh, that's so gross what they did, and that's a horrible person just based on their record. And then, someone's talking to them and I guess gets kind of reeled in. So, okay. So the terms psychopathy and sociopathy are used interchangeably in the field. However, the difference is their emotional makeup, their behavior problems, and the origin of their conditions. Psychopathy is known to be more nature, like more biological. And if you have a first degree biological relative, then you're more prone to get it. Where sociopathy is more environmental stresses. So like if you have trauma, you were neglected as a child, bad parenting practices. They tend to be a little bit more impulsive and have outbursts, while the psychopaths are more like cunning and manipulative. And they can just wait back. They can just stand back and just wait for the perfect time to strike.
I did read something forever ago that was talking about how sociopaths in general tend to like struggle with their sociopathy, as it were, whereas psychopaths don't, and it's just second nature for them.
Exactly. Sociopaths are more aware of like, okay, like this isn't right. Like I'm not, like I can't, I'm so impulsive, and that's obviously a problem. Or, just be erratic and know that like I maybe shouldn't be behaving like that, but I can't help it because they're so impulsive. So, so diagnostic features, the three key traits are disinhibition or impulsivity, callousness or like lack of empathy, and then boldness, which is like not having fear. Many psychopaths, well, I'm going to talk about the brain and psychopaths in a little bit, but they don't feel fear because the amygdala isn't working properly. Some of the other brain structures aren't working properly. They have reduced volume, so the brains are smaller than other people's, and the amygdala is responsible for fear and for empathy, and so that a lot of times they think that psychopaths, like when they do studies, they'll show them stuff that like other people would have a reaction of fear, they don't. So they say like sometimes they're willing to commit crimes, to do things to kind of get like they kind of like get off on the excitement because they feel that so infrequently because they just have.
Apparently, I've read a lot of things about psychopaths because they're coming into my head now.
Okay, good.
But but I do remember reading another thing that was saying that with psychopaths, it's not so much that they're inherently evil, it's that their emotional connection to the rest of the world is just switched off, and they
Right.
have to voluntarily switch it on. And because they don't have an emotional connection to the rest of the world, it empowers a great amount of evil acts because it's like if I'm not emotionally connected to something, I don't care that I'm causing harm, if that makes any
Right. Well,
sense.
that's why they have lack of remorse and they have, like lack of empathy. And there's, discussion, can empathy be taught or, is it once if you have lack of empathy, you have no empathy and that's it? Um, people could debate on that. They do definitely have a lot of emotional deficits. And that's why, if they don't connect, like you said, if they don't connect to people, they don't feel bad for what they did. They don't, when they act in a way that's, like that's bad, then they don't necessarily associate that could cause them problems. Like they just have that connection. Um, and then their fearlessness. So you have to be 18 to be diagnosed with psychopathy, and you don't need to be for antisocial personality disordered people. You have to be diagnosed with conduct disorder when you're younger, and then you get to be antisocial. Then you get to be antisocial. Well, psychopathy is just like you have to be 18, and that's it. And then be diagnosed with one of those instruments. So the prevalence in the U.S. is around 1.2%, and it's most notably more prevalent in males, and significantly higher in incarcerated populations. Like between 10 to 30% of people incarcerated are psychopaths. And then, even though research suggests that men is more prevalent in men, females can be psychopaths, and they say sometimes from the male to female ratio is 6 to 1. But they think it's due to like diagnostic bias, the way women are socialized to maybe like have more empathy and be more communal, and not exhibit as much violent behavior, but more indirect, like relational aggression, being manipulative. So it doesn't come out as it's not paid as much attention to as some, so it doesn't come to the attention of law enforcement as much because it's kind of like under the radar stuff that they're doing instead of like out there, being super violent.
That well, one, we have a question from YouTube, but before that, I remember reading a book on serial killers forever ago, and they were talking about how there's significantly more male serial killers than female serial killers. However, there is a concern that that's not actually the case because females just tend to be better at killing and getting away with it. Like a lot of the female serial killers that were caught like either on accident or because they were just being incredibly sloppy toward the end, but they had racked up like a really high body count. And like this kind of feels like the same thing. Like maybe it's not so much that there's more of them, it's just that they're better at hiding it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point. And the core causes of psychopathy are the same in men and women, but just it's expressed differently, like you said.
Mm.
So
So
their behavior might not immediately be recognized um, as as bad as males. So, okay, what is the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath? So, a psychopath is more genetic in nature, and they have, while sociopath is more environmental in nature, and they tend to behave a little bit differently. Sociopath is more like erratic and impulsive, while someone with psychopathy is like really cunning and manipulative and kind of like they can like wait back and like bide their time until the time is right to like strike, while sociopaths have a more difficult time doing that. But in the field, people use the terms like, and even without the field, people use the terms interchangeably a lot. So thank you. That's a good question. So like I said, 1.2% of people in the general population in the US are psychopaths. And then some studies suggest that in prevalence among CEOs and senior executives is higher, as much as 3 to 21%, depending on the study. So these are when they say, we're talking about like successful psychopathic traits. Like, I mean, they can be charming, fearless, cool head under stress, lack of remorse as they like, maybe push other people under the bus as they climb the corporate ladder, things like that. Dr. Hare, who did the PCLR, and this guy, Paul Babiak, wrote a book called Snakes in Suits. It was the first book to explore this. It's a great book. And it's the first to quantify the presence of psychopaths in the C-suite, as they call it. And now they're saying anywhere between 8 to 12% of people with those jobs are psychopaths, but successful psychopaths. So, and then this is interesting. The top 4 career choices for successful psychopaths are CEOs, attorneys, media personality, and a salesperson. So it's quite a range of professions.
all of those check out though. I feel like all of those
Right.
internally, they're career choices where I think we go, can I trust you?
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Um, so there's tons of books written upon it now. So I encourage you, if you're interested at all in that topic, there are good reads. And then I heard about this study where this man, psychologist, neuropsychologist, was looking at brains of psychopaths and then non-psychopaths. And he's putting them in different piles, and he let them, do an MRI or CT scan or whatever of his brain. And he put that, it was in the psychopathic pile. And then when he realized that was his, later down the road, he, was quite surprised and disheartened to know that his brain was similar to a psychopath's. And, some of the people said, well, how can that be? You're so, you've adapted and you're not out there murdering people and, you're personable and all this stuff. And one of the theories he came up with is that psychopaths are like, they can watch other people and know, well, I should react like that, even though that's not naturally how they would react. But they're like, oh, you're supposed to say, I'm so sorry for your loss when someone dies, even though they'd be like, who cares? Because they have that lack of empathy. But they can observe others and kind of take cues from their behavior. So, in development, of course, it's chronic, but it becomes less evident and it starts to remit usually by the early 40s. At least in regard to the criminal behavior part. So they commit less crimes. So that's not always the case. I've definitely talked to some who are way past their 40s. So, yeah. And then, so there's environmental factors. I think I touched on this real briefly before, like parental neglect, trauma, child abuse, chaotic home. So that's more like the nurture, while nature is, you know, it's more common against with relatives. If they have biological relatives who have it, then you're much more likely to get. There's a very strong genetic component to it. And then it's also been associated with people in low socioeconomic status in urban settings, in those type of environments. And people claim that it's overdiagnosed in African American men and, as they said, brown men, because they are diagnosed with it more. So it's like, is it being overdiagnosed, or what is, are there really more in those races or ethnicity? And then and then also there's a question about if it's being misapplied to people who live in like high violence environments where they kind of have to like gang members, like maybe they participate in that, do those behaviors because they want to survive. It's a survival strategy. And actually, I was thinking about this yesterday, what's going on in Mexico, you could maybe ask yourself the same question. Are every single cartel member a psychopath? Or is every single gang member a psychopath? Obviously you can't sit down the cartel members and do the PCLR with them, but I just thought it was an interesting question.
Well, to me, there's also a question of, like you were talking about a survival trait, but it's also like a cultural trait. Like you read accounts of former gang members, and in some cases, like former gang leaders, and they talk about how they try to, as they're recruiting people, they try to instill um, a lot of the traits that you've talked about of being a psychopath, of like no fear, no remorse, willingness to act immediately, all of that stuff. And, on one hand, you can say, oh, well, all of these psychopaths naturally gravitated toward working for the cartel because it makes the most out of out of who they are. But you could also say that potentially the cartel is trying to create psychopaths or sociopaths, because that's what they want. That's the people that they want working for them. Ali, I know you mentioned you had a question.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's a little different than this topic specifically, but I think about the person that maybe wasn't in like a healthy relationship. Maybe they were in like a, relationship they were comfortable in, and it was one of those things. Maybe they stepped away from that relationship, and they were like, well, I'm selfish now. Like I'm gonna go do things for myself, and they kind of get those. They may exhibit it or say to themselves, like, I'm selfish. Like, am I now a psychopath? Like, am I no better than maybe a toxic partner that I'd had, or a toxic friend or family member? So just to kind of, and I know I'm going back a little bit, but it seems to me that when somebody is diagnosed as a psychopath, they may not even realize it. It's an unconscious thing, more or less, but their characteristics and behaviors exhibit and make them a psychopath, if I'm understanding correctly.
Well, yeah, I mean, what differentiates like maybe just some of the traits you're talking about versus really being psychopath or even having antisocial personality disorder are their consistent violation of social norms and other people's rights through their behavior, through using their like manipulative, cunning traits to like get someone. So I think I could see your point that if someone has like a horrible toxic relationship, then maybe they're like, okay, I don't care anymore. Like I'm done caring about other people, and that could be seen as a psychopathic
Yeah.
trait for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was thinking that because I mean I've heard it, in passing with people. Like, am I actually a psychopath? Like, what's wrong with me? I just turn my care off like a light switch. So,
Yeah.
that was why I wanted to kind of bring it up for discussion
Yeah.
and even see if people
That's
out
interesting.
there might have similar thoughts and comments. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I mean the term gets thrown around very loosely. I mean, people are always like, "Oh, that person's a sociopath. That person's a psychopath." With obviously everyone's not going to know the traits and know the PCLR and stuff like that, but you hear it used a lot, and a lot of times it's incorrect the way it's being used. Um, if someone's just like unlikable, they'll be like, "Oh, what a psychopath!" But you know, it's many psychopaths are very likable, unfortunately, until they start committing violent crimes against you. Um, so you mentioned, Aaron, you kind of mentioned cultural stuff, and some of the diagnostic issues related to are like there's cultural misinterpretation of traits. Like some cultures might see having like being cold as a good thing instead of like a really bad thing, just because they have different ways of expressing themselves. Um, and then I mentioned the overdiagnosis in minorities, and then the it seems to be more aligned with Western individualistic cultures. So that would be like the United States is one example. There's many other Western individualistic cultures, but and then the diagnostic, cultural, and linguistic differences can sometimes have someone be diagnosed with it who maybe might not be, and then once they have that label on them, like in the correctional facility, then you know lack of treatment options, because there's more treatment options for antisocial personality disorder. Not a ton with them either, but more than there are for psychopaths. Um,
Yeah, I can definitely see, like, because the way you describe it, I can definitely see, like, I would fight very hard to avoid this diagnosis, just just because, like, there's so much manipulation that appears to be like part of it, where like this diagnosis almost comes with you lose all benefit of the doubt, or you should have lost all benefit of the doubt, you
yeah.
know?
Well, and they are very cunning and they're pathological liars. So who knows? If that's where you have to have a ton of records, ideally, to diagnose it, because they do lie all the time. So maybe they're lying about some of the stuff they've done. Um, I think one of the traits that I think I forgot to mention was a lot of another thing that another trait that contributes to psychopathy is a wide range of criminal offenses. So this isn't just someone who does robbery over and over and over, though they can be a psychopath, but people especially who like have like assaults, batteries, murder, bank robberies, you know, on all the other crimes that people commit. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
and
I
there,
was just going to chime in really quick.
yeah,
I'm sorry. I was just going to chime in because, as you were mentioning, like a continued pattern of criminal activity and mischievous behaviors. I know with the diagnosis of like the antisocial personality disorder, that's only at 18, because I think of it as as adolescents. Sometimes with hormone changes and balances, as people are maturing, they may get themselves into some you know not so great activities and behaviors. So it sounds like that might be the rationale as to why someone has to wait till they're 18 for that
well, for
specific
antisocial
diagnosis.
personality disorder, you have to have a diagnosis of conduct disorder when you're younger. You can't be ASPD
Gotcha.
without having conduct disorder, but you can be psychopathic without having
Okay.
conduct disorder. So there's just there's some minor distinctions
Is
between the two.
is that a relatively new thing? Because fun story, or actually not a fun story at all. But when I was younger, one of my friends, very religious, conservative family, and he had gotten quite rebellious and you know not super bad, but definitely on the far end of not super bad, closing toward there might be a problem. Um, but his parents took him to a mental hospital and they diagnosed him with antisocial personality, and he was like, "There's all these problems with that, and I'm blah blah blah. I'm just a teen." Is so I guess my question is that a relatively new thing because of that? Because I know his parents took him to like a very conservative Christian institution.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, is that a new thing?
No, a previous diagnosis of conduct disorder in order to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder has been in the DSM for a long, long time.
Okay. Okay. So I didn't get all the story then.
Um, so, okay, so psychopaths are also more likely to be diagnosed with substance abuse disorders.
Mhm.
And specifically, they're more likely to do abuse cocaine and stimulants. Probably because they have that like low reaction to everything. I don't know why someone wants to do it, but my theory is maybe it's because they don't have that. But it takes a lot for them to get like excited about something or feel like some sense of
I feel like
stimulation, and so they
it's
need to
also
that way.
de- sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
Fine.
But like to me, it makes sense because depressants like alcohol, they lower your inhibition. And that's why so many people like alcohol and even hallucinogenics to a certain extent also lower your inhibition or your concern about the rest of the world,
Yeah.
which is part of the reason why people like weed. Um, but if you're a psychopath, what it sounds like you're telling me is you don't have a concern about the rest of the world. You don't need to have your inhibitions lowered anymore.
Right.
So the only drug to me that would do something for you would have to be a stimulant. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. No, I agree with you. Um, so the reason it's not in the DSM is because it's considered a personality construct, not a personality disorder, but personality construct rather than a distinct mental illness. So as a spectrum disorder, which is how we classify it, there's just a huge range on this continuum of behaviors and how well you can function and um, how much your function abilities, the severity of it, the how many crimes you're out there committing or how you're treating other people. So there's antisocial personality disorder focuses more on behavioral activities, and psychopathy, I think I said this earlier, is more of the affective traits of like lack of empathy, no remorse, shallow affect, things of that nature. So also, antisocial personality disorder has more clinical treatment options. Um, you don't see a ton of group therapy for people who have antisocial personality disorder. Although you would, you know, a lot of people in prison have antisocial. Almost all people in prison have antisocial personality disorder. So, do they go to groups? Yes, because a lot of times inmates and detainees are made to go to groups, therapy groups. So, in that sense, they're all there, but like they're not talking about like their crimes typically. They're talking about like how to, like anxiety or, you know, depression or other topics that, even they get depression or anxiety sometimes. I mean, you know, just by being in a facility, versus someplace else, you might be anxiety. You might have it about different things, but it's treated the same. So, what else? Let's see. So, in terms of differential diagnosis, so I just went over the antisocial personality disorder, but a lot of psychopaths also, there's a lot of cross traits with people who have narcissistic personality disorder. And the difference is people who have narcissistic personality disorder, they have some of the, low affect and lack of empathy and stuff like that, but they're not impulsive, aggressive, thank you, and deceitful. Those are kind of traits just for narcissism. So there are, like the grandiosity, big ego, that kind of stuff is the same, but they're just not as violent as psychopaths.
You can have both narcissism and psychopathy.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a really not pleasant person to come into contact with. That's really run if you meet someone who has those. And there's no diagnosis in the DSM that's based on criminal behavior. There's not just like, oh, if you committed a lot of crimes, then this is your mental illness. It doesn't work that way. And then let's see. Okay, so there's no medications approved by the FDA to treat psychopathy. Now you can use medications for symptom management, and those are typically used because you have to use them off label. So like antipsychotics are used to reduce aggression and violent behavior, and that would be like risperidone, Seroquel, and then clozapine is highly effective in treating aggression and violence in men who have psychopathy. It's kind of like the go-to. And then also mood stabilizers. They can treat like irritability, mood swings, because psychopaths can have those too. And they treat them with like Tegretol or lithium. And lithium is an anti-epileptic drug, but they use it off-label for treating psychopaths for their mood swings.
Don't they also, and I only remember this from the movie Garden State, so it could entirely be wrong.
Uh-huh.
But don't they also use it for depression, or used
Yeah,
to use
yeah,
lithium for
for
depression?
bipolar disorder. This is one of the major ones they use
Okay.
for bipolar disorder, but they use it off-label for with psychopaths, some of their mood swings and stuff like that.
Okay. Oh, I
Um,
get so excited when pop culture gives me correct information about mental disorders because it
right,
never
you never
does.
know though, right? So it's good to have that verified. So people who have psychopathy are 20 to 25 times more likely to be incarcerated, and half of all violent crimes in the US are committed by psychopaths. So we just think about that. That's crazy.
That
That's all psychopaths
uh,
out there.
another just random fact, I guess, that I heard or that I read is they did a study of like uh, battlefields after the fact, and they found that it was more than 80% of the bullets fired missed and weren't even close to their targets. Um, and it's been used as sort of a evidence that the human inclination is very heavily against violence. Like we tend to act like we're okay with it, but for the most part, we are not, and it's something we try under all circumstances to avoid.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, and I think that statistic is really scary because you're out like you're wandering around, you're like, like they could just go become really violent and aggressive at any time. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily
So
that you
most
have
of
to
us are
like
afraid of
choose
fighting
them.
back, and then there's like 1% of us that have no issue with it at all.
Right. Yes. In fact, they use it like, they use it all instrumentally. So
Yeah.
they're not opposed to it at all. Okay, so in terms of the brain, um, shows that psychopathy is primarily developmental in nature and with persistent traits becoming apparent before the age of 10. So, which is really, I mean, to think about like some of these, more observable behaviors and violent behaviors, if you have, a 10-year-old doing that in your house and you're a parent, it'd be terrifying. So some of the implications that researchers found is that the neurocognitive peculiarities show that there are already like there's differences in brains between psychopaths and non-psychopaths that can kind of like hijack our ability to even learn any moral codes whatsoever if you're a psychopath.
So we have
So there's the like
that's
no
very interesting.
empathy. Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah. If someone else.
ASD, that's antisocial disorder, right? ASD?
Yeah. Or there's something to say ASPD, but it's same diff.
Okay.
Um, well, I mean, people who have like this grandiosity and a big ego don't typically present in therapy because they think they're great and there's nothing wrong with them. And if other people don't recognize that, then something's wrong with that person. So they don't come to therapy very often unless like in a correctional center, if they're like made to go to therapy. And a lot of times then they're just there like to get out of their cell, or talk to a female staff member, something like that. And they're not really taking it very seriously. That's been my experience anyway. So several regions of the brain, like the pons, the thalamus, and the basal ganglia, um, are impaired with people who have psychopathy. There's volume reduction in many parts of the brain, especially with the amygdala too. And those are the regions that control like involuntary actions, emotional processing, interpreting sensory information, things along those lines. So, especially with factor one. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Anyone?
I would expect the opposite, just because, um, like these are, if I remember anatomy correctly, these are more like primal portions of the brain versus like your frontal lobe, which is, a lot of the thought process portions. I feel like for somebody who's a psychopath, I would expect their frontal lobe to be smaller in that like they're processing less and just jumping to action
Right.
versus the primal portions to be smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, one would think because impulsivity comes from your, prefrontal lobe. And
Yeah.
so that would be a good assumption. Um, but yeah, with the amygdala, the volume reductions are 17 to 19% smaller. It's a pretty significant amount.
That's statistically significant.
Yeah. The amygdala is for emotional processing, is particularly fear and empathy. So if your brain is significantly smaller in an area of the brain that's processing that stuff, then it's no good. And then you have emotional detachment, lack of guilt, fearlessness, all the things that help when you're, I guess, out there committing crimes. Let's see. And I think that's pretty much it. One thing I wanted to say about the amygdala is that it supports the low fear theory, which suggests that they have a diminished capacity to associate their actions with any consequences. So, yeah, I mean, especially if you're like a younger person with antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, sometimes your brain isn't fully developed anyway, so you have a problem associating consequences potentially with actions, but then add psychopathy to it, and some of these change, the amygdala deficits, and you know, there's not a lot that can be done about that.
So I have I have a few questions,
Sure.
but I think the first one is like, is there living with psychopathy and not being a total trash bag? Um, I should probably have a better phrase for it, but like, is it possible for somebody with psychopathy to just be a normal person and not, just not be evil and criminal and whatever?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the CEOs or C-suite level people are an example of that. That psychologist I mentioned earlier, the neuropsychologist, I mean, he's, works at a university, has a family, never committed any crimes. Um, there are those people who can, not violate social norms and commit criminal behavior and, you know, maybe have some of those effective interpersonal traits, but still manage to function in a healthy way, a pro societal way. Um,
Okay.
but they seem to
Okay.
be in the not as many of them out there than the other ones.
Okay. That makes
So,
sense. Um, so all my other questions revolve around pop culture because
okay.
and in some cases like actual history, um because like it's just fascinating. um the the first one that I have is like when you were first talking about this, one of the things that popped into my head, and I know Allie, it was the same thing with you, was like this is Ted Bundy. Like 100%, this is exactly who Ted
Totally.
Bundy is.
Yeah, and that's a great example of the one who's like very glib and charming and can, like thinks a lot of himself and can then go do these acts to other people that are like unimaginable to most of the population, thank goodness. But yeah, he's a great example of psychopath. And the guy in American Psycho.
That was my next one.
What his character's name was, but yeah, he's a great example as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was Christian Bale, and he's phenomenal. But yeah, I remember watching that movie and then liking him, liking his character and liking him. And then there's like certain moments where you're like, oh wait, never mind. But then it switches right back
Yeah.
to oh yeah, he's very charming and yeah.
Oh, yeah. When they have something they want, I mean, they're like chameleons, they know how to get what they want from most. I don't know, that's a big generalization, but many of them, because they can kind of go into this personality that's, they're quite likable for, in that moment. But then, then they're committing some horrible crime and coming back and going to sleep and not thinking a thing about it. So,
So uh my my other question revolves around I don't know if anybody uh who's seen this has seen the Netflix Daredevil show.
mm,
It's first off, it's fantastic. It's super violent, but it's fantastic. But in one of the I'm gonna try and explain it without spoiling anything. But in one of the seasons, there's a character who basically like they're very physically gifted, but they also appear to just not care about the life or happiness of other people. And that's sort of identified at a very young age for them. And then their therapist basically says, okay, what you need to do is um, find someone that you can identify as they are doing good, like they are a good person, and just try and mirror your life around what they would do in any given circumstance that you're in. And that's how you can avoid being this terrible person. And then, of course, somebody else more terrible identifies it and turns them into a terrible person.
yeah.
But is that like an accurate, acceptable kind of treatment for psychopathy? Of like, I guess if it's caught early, of like, okay, what you need to do is find the proper mirror, I guess.
Um, I think that to a certain extent, like they can observe other people and be like, okay, that's what you're supposed to say or do, when a person does this. So they can, mimic other people's behaviors, um, or, like what they're supposed to say in certain situations. So they can appear, not psychopathic. But it's also someone who you're talking to and being charmed by them, and then you see them 10 minutes later and they're a completely different person. You would not even think they were the same person. So it's kind of scary. It's pretty scary, actually.
I mean, it's also, don't get me wrong, like in totality, the traits of a psychopath are horrifying, but like on an individual basis, I feel like I understand sociopathy more because, like, on an individual basis, a lot of the traits that you're talking about, like, they're desirable traits. Like, I would love to have less fear. I would love to be more charming and glib, and I would love, all of these things. Um, that tend to go along with psychopaths. I don't want to be psychopath.
Yeah, like I mean, it sounds like maybe you're referring to like the affective interpersonal aspects of psychopathy, like the ones you just mentioned, versus the behavioral aspects of psychopathy, which are less desirable.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, but even to a significantly lesser extent, like the lack of guilt can be very helpful. I think can could be very helpful for people. It could also be very horrible for
yeah,
people, but you know, I've definitely been in situations where I've done something and been like, okay, I did the right thing, I did what I was supposed to, but then the guilt still racks me and it keeps me up at night. In that circumstance, I would love to be able to just be like, nope, not feeling guilty.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good example of what a quote unquote normal person would do versus a psychopath who uses that to like go out and commit more crimes because they don't think about it for a second after it's done. So, any other questions? No. All right. Well, that's all I have.
All right. Well, this was a great conversation. I feel like if if we continued the conversation, it would be entirely me talking about comic books and just boring everybody, being like, "Oh yeah, and then in this one thing, this happened, and is that right?" And also spoiling a lot of things for people who might watch this and be into comic books or comic book movies or whatever. So I'm going to leave that alone. But I could continue talking about this forever because
It's a
I
pretty
think it's
fascinating topic, I think.
yeah. Well, like for me, it's that this is it works on two levels. Like one, it's okay, this is the mental health issue and oh, this is a disorder that we'd like to be able to treat and quite honestly, we're kind of about how to treat it. But on the other hand, it's almost philosophical to me in like the temptation of and the I guess wrongness of you know I guess maladaptive behavior is that the right word um of acting like that because like
Right.
I was saying before you talk about this you know somebody like Ted Bundy everybody liked him you know somebody like the guy from American Psycho or the Joker, you know, they have this appeal and they have this ability to get things done, which a lot of us, I think, envy in a lot of ways. And I think that for a lot of us, we tend to associate, for lack of a better word, the evil of their actions with the ability to get things done versus the hey, it's something else. And I don't know, for me, from like a philosophical perspective, it's just super interesting of how there is this difference in this line between what is good and what you should do, and then what isn't and what is not effective, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Um,
Sorry,
the
that was just me kind of rambling on that, but
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point. It's an interesting question.
yeah. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everybody for watching and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Go to lamcowellness.com. Thank you to them for sponsoring this, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.